You know that one song you can't get enough of? Chances are it was made with a sample from Splice. Explore top packs made by your favorite producers, sketch out song ideas in seconds with Create Mode, and dive into a sample catalog that's so deep, it's dangerous. Find out why Splice is the industry's not-so-secret secret. Visit splice.com and try for free today. Welcome to the Fader interview. I'm Alex Robert Ross, editorial director of The Fader. John Cale has always been a step ahead. He was post-rock while rock was still finding itself, post-punk before punk existed, constantly moving toward a distant beacon only he could see. Born and raised in the mining town of Garnant, Wales in 1942, he took refuge in his local library as a teen, devouring music scores most professionals at the time couldn't make sense of. His passion for the avant-garde led him across the Atlantic to the forward-thinking Tanglewood Music Center in western Massachusetts. But his burgeoning appreciation for aggressive rock and roll alienated him from his professors there. He found a more welcoming home in New York, with Fluxus luminary Lamont Young's Theater of Eternal Music. Shortly after his move, in 1964, he joined forces with a young New Yorker named Lou Reed to found the Velvet Underground, where he would create drone mayhem beneath Reed's lyrical experiments. But even the world's most progressive rock band was intimidated by Cale's vision, and he once again found himself too far ahead of the curve and out on his own. Since leaving the Velvets in 1968, Cale has been in constant flux, working solo and collaboratively on everything from delicately crafted chamber pop symphonies to pulverizing dronescapes. An outspoken hip-hop fan, he's incorporated trap drums into his own instrumentation, with the same facility he's brought to so many other innovations in sound, devouring them before recreating them in his own image. In January, he shared Mercy, his first full-length album of original music in over a decade. It features an ensemble cast of younger acts: Laurel Halo, Actress, Wires Blood, Sylvan Esso, Animal Collective, Fat White Family, and Tai Shi. He's still ahead of the pulse, pulling some of modern music's most singular freaks even further from the mainstream. With every feature, he coaxes new raw material out of each collaborator and molds it into something more powerful. At the same time, he's gently slowing down, drawing nearer to a place where he'll finally be content to pass the torch. Following Mercy's release, The Fader's Raphael Helfand sat down with Cale for a brief but illuminating conversation about experimental music's past and future, John Lennon's smoking habits, and making a scene at the movies.
Growing up in Wales, you were drawn to sort of like the bleeding edge of Western music, like Berg, Webern, Stockhausen, the Getty Cage, etc. You had the ears of like a much more seasoned listener. What do you think it was about your upbringing, or like just your innate sensibility, that led you immediately to music that's like such an acquired taste for everyone else?
Good question. I was always interested in the experimental side of things. I was messing around with experiments like at school, and I got more satisfaction out of understanding some algorithms than about what a melody meant. So I got used to that. Some people at school, they got used to it too, and they thought I was a nut job for wanting to go after Berg, Webern, and on all of the 12-tone masters.
Yeah.
And so I just kept going, but then I said, this is not all of it. This is not what all of it is meant to be. Then slowly you progress from what new music is about today versus new music in a decade. You may like what's happening now, or you may not. I mean, you find suddenly that in about another 2 years, your tastes have changed.
Right.
And so I was happy to follow it.
There's a great story of you being sort of like jumped into the cult of rock and roll at age 15 when you went to a screening of Rock Around the Clock, and it
That's
suddenly
right.
turns into a dance party. Yeah. Was it like a short road from there to like immersing yourself fully in rock music? And like, how did your like new listening habits inform the rest of like your classical education?
Yeah, it was all very irritating for most of the people in my school, but everybody was like, it was surprising the variety of responses. I'd have the ladies of the valley would come, and I would go with a friend of mine from high school. I go and sit through the film. What we're trying to do is to not create a stir. This is serious stuff. I mean, this is God here. So then, as I was walking out of the theater, oh my God, there were the ladies of the valley, and I thought, oh, I'm in trouble now. But what happened was the ladies said, that was very, very funny. And they completely turned the tables on me. It was very good.
Once you came to the States and you went to Tanglewood, like sort of the rock that sort of seeped into your classical playing got you into some trouble at Tanglewood, and you were deemed like sort of, I think, from what I understand, like a little bit too out there for Tanglewood and too aggressive. Yeah. And then, later, obviously, too out there for the Velvet Underground. So like too out there for what are supposedly like the most out there institutions in their respective forms.
I think you put your finger on the next album title.
Too out there.
Too out there.
Wow, yeah. But so like, did those like, whether you perceive them as rejections or not, did those conflicts ever lead to like moments of doubt? Were you always like completely confident in your artistic vision back then?
No, never. Not confident. No, I mean there was always suspicion about whether I was really seeing this thing from the right point of view. It depends on who you ask. I mean, if you talk to my music teachers, they would say, forget it. He's just wasting time. And then, a little later on, I suddenly had friends in the music business. And, you really developed a camaraderie with people from your local valley, and it's such a strange sort of coincidence that years later you'd run into them and they said, "Hey, how you doing, man?"
You still seem to hold a lot of like reverence for like those earliest like Fluxus artists who inspired you and believed in you.
Yeah, they were a bundle of laughs. I mean, really, George Rachunas, for instance, was really the strongest guy. I mean, he's the one that got through to a lot of people in New York who didn't quite understand what was going on. And Yoko brought John Lennon by to meet George Rachunas. George said, Yoko, now look, I know you're going to bring John around to visit. He said, but you got to realize something. He's a chain smoker. And I have asthma. And I'm tied to my air filter. I can't, have my breathing interrupted or messed with. And so Yoko said, well, what can I do? He said, okay, I will charge you $100 per cigarette. And George was there with his tank and with his breathing apparatus and his tents. And George was a stateless Lithuanian.
Right.
He made the best of it, but he was trained as an architect. While he was training as an architect, he also learned a lot about, well, a very Lithuanian approach to education. But I mean, it was a hard scrabble. But he had a following in the people who were building new buildings in New York, downtown in New York. He was in a strange position. He built this following up of people who just understood exactly what the new designs were. But there were certain code rules. You can't pay people this wage because they've been trained to work for other people, and that you don't. So it was an unfortunate circumstance that because he wrote his own rules, he was very poorly treated. So the fact that John was smoking was really the least of the problems.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's one loquacious story.
Right. Yeah. Going back to Fluxus and sort of like those codes of Fluxus, which principles of Fluxus have you like held with you think, throughout your career that you learned early on, and which have you like left behind, you think?
Oh, that's a complicated question.
Yeah.
It's a good one, but it's the subject matter, the basis of the subject matter was no longer music. What George had done was he understood what Lamont was into, and it's very clear that there were a lot of people in New York that were treading the light fantastic, doing different styles of music and styles of living. Stockhausen would be out there doing music with several different keys. There would be one key for one instrument and another key for another instrument. I think it came to a point where everybody was experimenting, and it was kind of a scrum. That's what it was. All these composers that were really not following methods, compositional methods. And so nobody could really point at what was going on. Nobody could say, well, he did that, because if you said that, you were really marking your territory. You're really like telling people, this is what I did. And what are you doing? It was a complex competition.
So yeah, I mean, I guess speaking of Fluxus, that's my last Fluxus question. But the short film for Noise of You sort of feels like the perfect like document of like intermedia. It's not just the music video, like the songs and the visuals and narration are all really intertwined. Yeah. I read in your LA Times interview that you said that that's your favorite song on the record. Am I going too far in like calling it sort of like the core of the record, Noise of You?
No, it's a very accurate description, because for me it was my favorite song. It reminded me of a lot of European cities that I would visit, and especially the ones behind the Iron Curtain. You find all these people there that were deprived of information about new music and new art. They would pop up and we'd say, well, we agree with that. That's how we see things developing in the art world, and this is what we want to do. And of course, the government would come down like a ton of bricks on them, especially in Prague. There were a lot of homegrown rock and rollers in Prague, full of character.
Your footsteps on the stairs, meet at the river house to say goodbye, to say goodbye. Was the noise of you? Was the noise of you? Was the noise of you? Was the noise of you?
You also have talked about that song as a love song. In the video you say, yep, it's a love song twice. You expressed like some ambivalence about writing love songs in the past. Do you think that this is like the purest love song you've written?
It was the most innocuous love song. It's kind of it did things without telling you what it was doing. So it was very subtle and kind of enjoyable because of that. I don't know whether that came from a place where I remembered it when I was in Australia, say. And I remember that song because it had these elements in it. But it was definitely a love song. And I had no qualms about owning up.
At the end of that video, you say, I want to be the one to hand you the future starting now. And that, I think, could be sort of read as a comment to like all of your younger collaborators on the record. Like,
I don't mind that at all. I don't mind that at all.
Yeah. Are these like the artists you think you feel like most comfortable handing the future to?
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly would.
there's a note across the screen in the video, not to harp too much in the video, about Wise Blood. That looks like it says like her classical training reminds me of my blending of the two worlds. Can you expand on that a tiny bit? Like, do you see Natalie as like in particular as a kindred spirit?
Well, she was very good at preserving both of them.
Yeah,
and they're both well fed on both sides of the artistic spectrum. So I appreciated that.
the collaboration between you two, Story of Blood, which comes next in the record, is like another real showstopper. I love that like you're rarely directly harmonizing with her. It's more like you're sort of orbiting each other. Is that like an effect that you were going for?
No, I wasn't going for it. It just happened. I mean, some of the best things happened by accident.
You see it coming, the thickness and the color, sliding across the floor. You lose all around, wakes you in the morning, and brings you down. Your soul,
A lot has been made about like your appreciation of hip hop at large and trap beats in particular.
Yeah.
And I think like Story of Blood is the song on the record where like maybe those are where you best integrate those trap elements, particularly like the machine gun hi-hat. It's a situation where it shouldn't work, but it really does. And I'm wondering if you draw inspiration on any particular producer for that one.
Well, I'm always listening to Kendrick Lamar, and a lot of us, the new artists, are really, they stuck to their guns. And I mean, I love Snoop and Dre, but Earl Sweatshirt has a strange and wonderful atmosphere about him.
Back to like your voice, because that's something I want to ask a little bit more about related to Wise Blood's voice. I'm wondering like what your vocal training is, because I know you have very intense like classical viola training, but I've never really heard much about your vocal training, and I think it's like your voice is like one of the things that stands out as like something that's remained somewhat of a constant in like your very fluctuating career.
Yeah, well, it's a fluctuating vocal.
Mm-hmm.
It's shifting the furniture on the Titanic. Because I get bored with musical developments really easy, but I also get a kick out of listening to all the new stuff that's going on, and they're always giving me a kick in the butt. I mean, not that I speak to them about it, but I mean, I draw from them what I appreciate.
You've got one of those voices I think is like really recognizable across form. While you're obviously vastly different artists from him, I sort of sometimes think of your career in parallel with Scott Walker's, and he's another, fiercely.
That's very funny. You should say that, because a lot of people in England kind of said that.
Yeah, I've never heard you talk about him, so I'm curious, like whether either of you like drew inspiration from him, if he drew inspiration from you. Like I don't know anything about the two of you together.
No, I don't. It was one of those shady partnerships. Not partnership, it's the wrong word. We didn't know each other well enough to really have a partnership. So, but it happened in London, and it happened when I was on Ireland. I suddenly found myself listening to people talking about Scott Walker and this, that. They were really noticing stuff about his style of production. Because I was moving around, I left London around the time that I think he popped up, and I really didn't get too much of an education in Scott's direction. I mean, but I certainly went looking for it, but I couldn't put my finger on it. That's why it was such a strange occurrence to have a conversation about someone you never met.
Yeah, I guess so. Just like returning to the Fluxus theory is like art as a point of like on a continuum rather than like a destination or a goal to be reached. Do you look back on any of your projects as like one opus, or is like the next project, the one you're working toward, always like the most representative of the essence of John Cale?
I think the last one.
Okay. Well, then that's all I've got.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care, man.
Yeah, you too.
That was John Cale talking to the Fader's Raphael Helfand. Cale's new album, Mercy, is out now via Domino and Double Six Records. The Fader interview is engineered by Tony Giambroni. The executive producer is Alex Robert Ross, and the associate producer is Raphael Helfand. We'd like to thank Loughton Audio for providing our microphones. You can find them online at lautenaudio.com. And we'd like to thank James Ivey for providing our intro music. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you left a 5-star rating and review. If you like listening to The Fader, good news. We're on the new live radio app, AMP. Download it from the App Store now. And keep an eye on thefader.com for essential music news, interviews, and essays. We'll be back next week with another episode of The Fader Interview. Goodbye until then. You know that one song you can't get enough of? Chances are it was made with a sample from Splice. Explore top packs made by your favorite producers, sketch out song ideas in seconds with Create Mode, and dive into a sample catalog that's so deep, it's dangerous. Find out why Splice is the industry's not-so-secret secret. Visit splice.com and try for free today.